Hello and welcome to Being Rad with me, Robert Alexander Duran. Today I have tech career coach and total nerd, of his own admission, Erik Gross. Erik, welcome.
Thank you. Now, as much as I'm a nerd, I have to say that, we've been chatting before we started and we've known each other for a little while. Sometimes the simple things escape me. This podcast is named after your initials, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, nothing gets past me.
Now that personal brands are like the thing, I'm leaning more into that, and thankfully my parents gave me cool initials.
Yeah. What am I going to do? Open a podcast called Being Gross? I don't think that's really going to fly.
It depends on the subject matter.
It does. It depends on my niche. Who's my ideal client avatar?
If it's teenagers who know how long they can go without showering, I suspect that would be incredible.
It's like total win. Oh, that's fantastic.
Then, as we discussed before, like there is the version of gross as in gross and net.
Mm-hmm.
And you just called it like gross revenue, but it's your name.
Absolutely. The Gross Income Podcast.
Yeah.
There we go.
So tell me what it means to be a tech career coach. This is something that I could probably imagine what that entails, but I'd rather hear it from the professional.
Yeah, absolutely. Love to. You can go a lot of different ways if you want to help people in their career, right? There's some of the stuff that's pretty common and almost mechanical, which is resume preparation or interview preparation and that sort of thing, right? And those are valuable things. But when I look at the whole area of a career, what I'm really interested in is how do you set somebody up so that over the long haul in an industry like technology, which experiences rapid change, it's just baked into the industry. How do you set someone up so that over the long haul, they're in charge of their career? So that they're never the effect of, changes in the economy or something that happens with their employer or anything like that. They have both the know-how in navigating the career and really deep, powerful engineering ability that helps them stand out, that helps them get recognized without being salesy or pushy. So there's a lot to what I do, but it goes beyond like I said, the pedestrian, help someone with a resume. Yeah, I can do that.
So to a certain extent, is it helping people in tech industry kind of with their personal brand, which sets them up for a long, prosperous career?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that part of it up because engineers don't often think of that. Here and there, you'll see standouts, right? But we don't often think of that. Honestly, for a lot of engineers, often we feel like the work should just stand on its own. If you want to get recognition either in the job or in the marketplace, if we even think of that, often our thoughts stop at, well, if I do good engineering work, that'll be good enough. The people who know what that means, the significance of it, those are the people that I care about knowing. But the fact it is a PR world. It is a public relations world, right? And in the same way that much of our work is not heads down coding and that's all we do. That's another myth about the technology industry. It's a very social activity, like making software, designing it, building it, testing it, deploying it, and maintaining it it's a group activity.
Collaborative.
Well, yeah, it is. Your career is a collaborative activity. We all know how many jobs you get just from your network, so not paying attention to your brand or public relations, that can be a career mistake. But for a lot of engineers, that's tough. So I do a lot of work with people on what I call a passive PR system. How do you really adequately represent your personality and your ability to handle wicked tough problems and your ability to collaborate on a team and innovate? How do you represent that, again, without being real pushy about it? There's never a need for that. But you certainly do want to make your abilities and your accomplishments known, because that's what many people aren't going to understand, the deep, technical, nerdy stuff. How do you communicate that?
So teaching them to brag with humility.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So we mentioned, before we jumped on, we mentioned Grant Cardone very briefly. There's your mug.
Yep, there it is.
So one of the things I remember Grant Cardone saying was never listen to a career advisor, because that's somebody who's given up on their dream.
Yeah.
Why don't you listen to them?
Yeah.
A lot of people, I could imagine, would see career coach and career counselor advisor as kind of synonymous. So how do you separate yourself from that kind of assumption?
I love that. I love that question. This is something I had to look at almost 10 years ago. It must have been the spring of 2013. And my son comes home from high school. He had a computer class in high school. And I'm a software engineer, so obviously I'm deeply interested, but I'm trying not to overwhelm him with my interest. Like, what'd you learn today? So tell me about binary. So my son comes home from school and he's all excited. He's got this piece of paper in his hand. He says, "Dad, I want to go to a coding boot camp." What's a coding boot camp? Even the words got me excited, right? And so I take a look at this sheet of paper, and it's all about this business down in the Bay Area called Dev Bootcamp, which had been around for 6 months at the time. It's a brand new thing. And it all came about because 3 engineers who had the summer off in 2012 decided to do an experiment with their friends who were always saying, "Hey, man, you got to help me get into tech. I can't go to school for 4 years, but I want to get into tech. I want to do what you do," right? So they did this experiment, and they just said, "All right, if you'll give us the summer, you're going to have to tell your respective loved ones they're not going to see you. You're going to give us 60, 70, 80 hours a week, and we'll just do everything we can to give you every bit of practical knowledge and background you need, and we'll see if we can get you into tech." And they had a dozen people, and 11 of them got hired, and they realized at the end of the summer, oh my, we have a business. And that's when Coding Bootcamp started. So here I am 6 months later, and my son walks in with this. And I don't know how often this happens for you, but every once in a while you have one of those moments where you're like, everything clicks. I've been instructing people in technology since my days in the Navy, decades before. I'm a working engineer. I love helping people and teaching them. Long story short, I co-founded a software developer bootcamp called the Tech Academy. You can find out about it at learncodinganywhere.com. Fantastic company. And we've helped a lot of people. But to get back to your question, my co-founder and I had a really critical choice to make right at the beginning of that, which was, do I quit my job and just do that? I was there for the beginning, creating all the curriculum, but then it was up and running. What do I do? And we made a very strategic decision. I decided to always be a working engineer. If throughout the entire period, whether the company could support me or not, I was going to be a working engineer. And we did that because I wanted to make sure that any curriculum advice, any job search advice that we put into that curriculum was based on real world know-how and current practices, current tools. And it's been invaluable over the years. Every time I need to step in and work out on something on the curriculum, I'm in the trenches doing it. And it's no different.
Like you said before, tech inherently needs current know-how because it moves so quickly.
Yeah. I just did a survey over the last month or two of technology professionals, and the number one thing that comes up as a concern or a frustration or worry on the job is the rapid pace of change. And even for bright knowledge workers, the engineers are bright knowledge workers, right? Even for us, it's like, man, it's like a fire hose.
Yeah.
So to answer your question very directly, it's a fair observation about, like, I love the way Grant would have said it with a Louisiana accent. And here I am in Louisiana, right? It's fair. Like, don't take advice from a career coach. If someone's failed on their dreams, man, I never have and I never will. I love engineering. I do cloud transformation during the day, and like, it's so much fun. I love that. But the fact is that I love knowledge workers. I love nerds, engineers, people that solve difficult, wicked problems. Like, these are my people. And when you see someone like, they're great at the engineering piece, but how do they become better innovators? How do they leverage their knowledge to create multiple streams of income without totally destroying their time and work-life balance? Like, these are things that a lot of engineers look at. I've cracked that. I've made all the dumb mistakes over the years and figured out a lot of things that are right. And so if I can step in and help, I will. Still going to be an engineer, still going to work because I love it.
Amazing. So the thing that really separates you from a career advisor or counselor is that you're still in the trenches.
Oh, yeah.
Because that's the thing that Grant says, isn't it? Like, don't listen to them because they are full-time telling people what they should do with their lives when they've given up on their own.
Yeah.
Whereas you're helping people do what avoid the mistakes that you've made. I would have thought as a large part.
Oh, and I've made them. I was talking to someone just the other day, and at first he was wanting to talk to me about, like, how do I figure out charging more for my side work? He's got a regular day job, and he's doing software development contracts on the side. It happens with a lot of technology workers, right? Because we have valuable in-demand skills, and you see, it looks like there's, one big common mistake people make in it, which is they're not charging enough for it. And even before that, though, a lot of people will actually charge on a per project basis. They'll say, okay, here's a website I'm going to work on, or some coding thing, connect up an API or whatever, right? And they'll say that'll be $2,000 or $5,000, whatever it is. Talking about learning lessons painfully, I never do that. And I advise all my clients to never, ever, ever do project-based, always do hourly, because there's one thing that is absolutely true about a project. Scope creep is inevitable. It will always get bigger than you think. The client, who is not a technology person, will inevitably add things into the job. And at the end of the day, you end up working for peanuts and frustrated, right? So again, that's something that I teach people about a lot. It's like you said, if I've made the mistakes, and I have, why would I not want to help someone not make those same mistakes? And that's part of what motivates me. It's like, I've done it. Like, don't do it, please. You can. It's a free country, right? But if I can at least give you some of the background of why I would say that. So to get back to that thing about, like, the comment about career counselors or coaches, there's lots of little pieces of wisdom that float around in culture that are mostly true. Like, I remember hearing years ago, those who can do, those who can't teach. It's funny, ha ha ha. And you sometimes see some of that in academia, right? Well, but again, what's that?
When I was studying, the lady who was teaching the business module, when I went back after 3 years, had been in my class when I was there previously. She had no business experience, so real world example of those that can't teach.
Yeah. Well, here's the other reason I do what I do is that I've had mentors along the way that have made an incredible difference. And just to speak directly to what you just said, when I was just coming up with the idea of this coding bootcamp, and again, there was very little of a template to go on. Now coding bootcamps are a pretty accepted element of the technology industry. There's hundreds and hundreds of around the world. They contribute between 40 and 60,000 trained professionals a year into the IT industry, right? They match the output of the colleges and universities, at least here in America. Colleges and universities are between 40 and 60,000, technology professionals, whether they get a computer science degree, information science, anything related. That's the output of the American university system, right? Well, the coding bootcamp industry, we matched that, which is pretty cool, right? But to speak to what you were talking about with, the lady who was just in the class 3 years before and is now somehow an expert, when I was flirting with this idea, I went to a friend of mine who is the chairman of the computer science department at a local, well-respected university. And he said, hey, what do you think of this? And I laid out the whole plan, right? And there's a lot to it. It speaks to what I cover in my career coaching services, but I'm not going to dive super deep into that. But suffice it to say, I was super concerned with giving people who went through the training, not just here's how to code, but one, here's the fundamentals underlying digital computers and computer science and the building of software. All that bedrock foundation. And two, I wanted to give them a practical experience where they were actually on a software development team, run the way they're run in the real world, and they wanted to experience that collaborative effort rather than reading about it or doing all of their projects with a team of one, because that's not what happens in the real world. And he listened to this and asked questions. At the end of it, he said, man, Erik, this is something you must do, which is, I thought he would be almost bothered. Like, hey, listen, we're in academia. We know computer science. Like, why would you think that your upstart little coding boot camp thing, because it was new at the time, would even be worth pursuing? And quite the opposite. It was like, listen, you're solving a problem that we can't solve. It's just not practical. One, you'll have current curriculum. We can't do that. Curriculum changes in the academic world, and it's probably true where you are in the world as well. They take months and years to get approved. We can't stay current. Two, we don't have the facilities to simulate or actually produce a real world coding environment, a real world work environment. So those two things alone do this. And so I bring this up again because mentors matter. Like the advice he gave me, his insight was tremendous. But again, to circle back around to what you were talking about, one of the things he was mentoring me on is, listen, part of the reason he did very well in his position, right? He's very well respected. And part of the reason why is that he always worked. He always had side work. He did software development projects for Nike. We were in Oregon, right? Nike is big there. That's where they're headquartered. And lots of other companies. But he was always working. So even though the restrictions of the academic world kind of put some, barriers there, he made sure that he always knew what was going on, right? So I don't know. If you're going to mentor people, man, you got to know what you're talking about. You have to be you have to be doing it. And so everything I cover, I've done. Good, bad, and ugly.
Would you say the difference between possibly a good or mediocre mentor and a great mentor is being able to see past their own limitations, perspective? Because like you said, what you would have expected from that guy would be to shoot you down for going against the academia route.
Yeah.
But actually he could see past that and was like, actually, this could be really big. It's not something that I could do for myself, but you should definitely do it. Do you think
Robert, that is spot on. That is spot on. This one took me a long time to learn. But one of the things I've seen lots of successful people pay attention to is cultivating an ability to genuinely see another person's viewpoint. And when you combine that with another skill, which is even rarer, which is the ability to let another person be right. Like to have, like, because we all deal with this. You bump into people that say something, you instantly, that's wrong. I disagree. I've got an opposing viewpoint. And it's a natural human tendency to just push back against that. So that's a great call. Seriously, Robert. Like I look at what my friend Brent, we're talking about, the professor, his name's Brent. Wonderful man. It would have been all too easy for him to have some perceived threat or danger. But by that point, he had already developed this kind of viewpoint I'm talking about, which is he was honest with himself about his limitations or the limitations of his position or what he had and hadn't been able to accomplish. And so he was able to look at the viewpoint of someone coming into that environment, wanting to be a really successful engineer and being in a system that was just cut off at the knees in terms of certain practical elements, certain being current with technology. He knew that. He wasn't going to pretend it was different. And I think that I love your question and your point there. Like, if something is, you can't pretend that it isn't. And if you do, you're not helping yourself or anyone else. Academia, unfortunately, is that way. There's lots of things about it that are fantastic. But yeah, it's super hard to have current curriculum. It's super hard to put together a real practical experience. So much of what I do actually with clients is go in and I find those missing holes in their knowledge. And we do two things. We fill them in, but more importantly, look, I've done a lot of things wrong. I've made mistakes along the way. We all have. I'll tell you one thing I did that I didn't even know how right it was. I went into the Navy years ago and went through nuclear power training, electronics technician training. And the one thing they concentrated on was this two-pronged approach of, we're going to teach you the theory behind things, electronics, nuclear power, chemistry, physics, heat transfer, fluid flow, all these things. You're going to learn some theory, but every single bit of it you learn, you're going to instantly be shown how you apply that on the job. When you get to a real ship, what are we actually using this for? What does that look like? There was this practical element that was just baked into the military training that I didn't even recognize at the time how unbelievably valuable it was.
Yeah, which is the opposite of a lot of academia where it's not theory. These people graduate and it's like, what do I do?
Oh, it's rough. It's rough. I've done onboarding programs for people that are new engineers from great universities, and they alternately blow me away, the students, and at the same time frighten me. I mean, they blow me away in that they're leagues beyond me in their understanding of some of the deep computer science theoretical things that are super valuable, especially when it comes to solving problems of scale, great magnitude, complexity. They're like way beyond me. I'm looking at these 21, 22-year-olds going, man, I wish I had your education in that area. But then you start asking them about the fundamentals of how does the web work? Crickets. How does it work that your browser right now is actually able to show images and sound and video? Nothing. How does a team actually build a feature? Man, nothing, right? So look, we all have these spots where we're really strong in one area, but weaker in another, especially in technology. There's no way to know all this stuff. There's just no way. So what do? Well, it's personal opinion. The fundamentals, the foundation, the principles underneath, like Have you ever heard or seen anything online about Elon Musk talking about this philosophy of first principles? There's some clips out there of him, because obviously, whatever you think of him personally, in terms of business accomplishments, he's gotten some stuff done. People want to know, like,
knows a few things.
Yeah, a few things, right? Like, how do you think? They want to find out, like, what gives, man? And he's spoken about this publicly a few times, which is the philosophy going way back, like, to the time of Aristotle, right? Of first principles. How do you take a subject and break it apart into smaller and smaller pieces so that you get to the point where you can no longer subdivide it anymore? The essential elements of that. As an example, one of the things that people who've worked in the industry, in technology for years, don't ever quite articulate or recognize maybe the value of is the actual purpose of a computer. The only purpose a computer has is to take in information, process it in some way, and pass on the information. That's actually all they're for. They're just a little tool to take in information, process it, and send it on, which again sounds so simplistic. But I can't tell you how valuable that one little bit of fundamental data is when you're analyzing a complex system, where you're now using, 2 or 10 or 200,000 computers to all accomplish a task. If you lose sight of the fact that for any single one of those machines, its only job is to take information, process it, and send it on, the complexity can start to be a little bit overwhelming. But taking that one little piece of data, you can, again, I could go way nerdy on this, okay? But I'll just say that it can really help to sort out overwhelming complexity, which is the job of an engineer. And it's something that all people struggle with too, as you work in an increasingly fast-paced technological society. How do you handle this unbelievably rapid pace of change? This, like nerds and technology are taking over the world. They affect every aspect of our life, even if you're not a technology worker. How do you sort this stuff out? So I just like giving people that solid foundation in what are these machines? What are these computers? What are they here for? How do they work? Because if you have the foundations, any new complexity that comes out, which it's going to, right? Any new complexity, you have a mental framework, a philosophical approach even, to sort through it and remain grounded and stable.
The only two things that I can truly relate that to is playing guitar and video.
Tell me
Every
about
time something changes on Premiere Pro,
Oh,
I already have the foundations
Yep.
of having been editing for 20 years now. I figured that out the other day. I made my first video when I was 14 and I turned 34 last. I'm 34 in 1 week today.
that's fantastic.
But because I've done editing for so long on so many different programs, you understand the fundamentals. Things might move around, but you can always revert back to the fundamentals. You can learn a new song on guitar and it's C major, G major, A minor, and F major. That's the 4 chords that most songs are based on anyway.
Oh, yeah.
But you can instantly do it because you know the fundamentals of how those chords are. I can only imagine that what you're talking about in the tech world is just a more complex version of exactly that learning curve.
Yes.
Because whenever you're learning anything, you take in the fundamentals, learn slow, and then you can speed things up.
Oh, yeah.
I can imagine if you start trying to learn anything in your sphere and you rush it, it's never going to work. You have to take it in at a pace that's going to be hardwired for you, right?
Absolutely. And it unfortunately happens all the time. Maybe tell me if you've seen this in your field of activity. One of the things I see all the time in technology is that when we're going to quote unquote teach people to code, we actually start by teaching them to code, which sounds logical, but it 1,000% isn't. I'll give you an example. You throw someone on a computer and you show them that maybe even a real simple language. There's a language that MIT developed years ago called Scratch. And it's used a lot to teach kids to code, right? Or another simple language from way back in the day called BASIC, right? Whatever it is, there's a language and you say, okay, good. Here's an instruction to print hello world on the screen. Type it out and it works. Wow, I printed that on the screen, right? Here's an instruction to loop through something 5 times. Oh, look, I looped through it and the number went up, right? Good. These are, yes, you're learning some fundamentals of using that language to do some things. But you know what you're not learning? What are the 5 basic elements of any computer program? No matter what the language, there's 5 things that every computer program has to have. And they actually matter a lot. There has to be an entrance point. What's the first instruction? There has to be variables. You've got to be able to have data that the computer's keeping track of that can change over time as the program is running. You have to have that, or you have a very limited program. Control and branching statements. You've got to have if, then, else. That's one of the chief values of a computer, is to be able to do these things that we as humans do, but do them super fast. You've got to have subprograms, repeatable chunks of code that you never have to write again, so you can be even faster and more efficient. And you can change it in one place if it needs to change. And finally, you have to have an exit point. What's the last instruction? And that way the computer knows, hey, I'm done running that. Any resources I was using for that computer program, I can release them, and they're available to other computer programs. If you don't have an entrance point, variables, control and branching statements, subprograms, and an exit point, you don't have a program. Now, you can take that little framework, which I rattled off, and no matter what programming language you're learning, you can find how does it do those 5 things. You've got that mental model. Every language that's an actual programming language will have those 5 things. And then you've been in the industry, say 10 years, you can come right back to that. You get on the job, you've got a behemoth of a program that's been around since the 90s and has 150,000 lines of code and takes your code editor like 5 minutes to build. It's just a scary beast. Well, guess what? Somewhere is the first instruction. It's there somewhere. And it's actually usually not that hard to find, somewhere very close to the beginning of the program. And you put a little point in there that says, hey, Mr. Computer, when you get here, stop. And I want to look around. It's called a breakpoint. It's really easy to add. So you do that. And you start the program up, and all of a sudden it stops right there. And you go, okay, good. So here I am looking at this program as close as possible to the beginning of it running. What's going on inside there? It's running. It's alive. I can see all the stuff that's being tracked. Where are we? What's next? What's already been, put together? But it's that fundamental of, every program has to have an entrance point. How do I get close to that? Right? So
it's funny what you said there, because that's directly relatable to both film and music.
Tell me.
Because you're basically talking song structure or narrative. It's exactly the same thing. Beginning, middle, end. And then obviously you can have other bits in there. You had a 5-step thing, but it's the story of what the program does, isn't it? Essentially.
Yeah.
And like with short form content now, instead of having a beginning or opening act, we call it a hook.
Hook story off, maybe. Yeah.
They can be nuanced, but it's the same thing.
Yeah.
Like with a song, you'd have intro, verse, chorus, middle eight, chorus. You know what I mean?
Yes.
It's exactly the same thing.
You're making me think of Max Martin.
You have the foundational knowledge of how to structure that so it doesn't end up being weird. Like, when you're watching a film and the narrative hasn't been structured right.
Yes.
Feel right.
Yeah.
Or when you hear a song by, Mesh Sugar, who's like a tech metal band.
What's the name? What's the name of it? Mesh Sugar? I love it.
I've never really listened to him. But
it makes me think of Mashugana. I grew up Jewish, right? And Mashugana, a nice Yiddish word, right? Yeah. Anyway, I'll have to look them up. But go on. This is interesting.
But if you have that kind of thing in your code, it might still work, but you'll notice that it's buggy or clunky within the flow of how it's meant to run. These things, they're the same things.
They are
issues that don't need to be there, and if they weren't there, they would improve the user's experience, the viewer's experience, the listener's experience. I love that. I've just made that connection.
That's beautiful.
Thought of programs being like film or music.
Oh yeah. There's a book that I think you might enjoy, and your listeners might enjoy. Yeah, it's called Range, and Epstein. The last name's Epstein. I think it might be David Epstein, right? But look up the book Range by Epstein. And here's what you made me think of is, and I'm sure you see this in your line of work as well. We become skilled at finding deviations from a pattern. If you take a top level engineer and they've got a huge chunk of code, they can actually start scanning through it, and they're not really looking at every single line of code, every single instruction at first. What they're doing often is they're actually looking for some point where an established pattern is deviated from. It's part of why we concentrate on, as engineers, and I don't know if you see this in your industry as well, there's these these measures called code quality, where it's almost like any plan is better than no plan, that principle, right? Listen, there's lots of ways you can take these text files that we're creating that end up being computer programs, right? When you're writing code, you're writing text, and then something turns it into computer instructions. It's almost like any plan is better than no plan. So if there's a 1,000 different ways of formatting that text, and if the computer doesn't care, because at the end of the day, the computer is just going to take that text you wrote and turn it into computer instructions. They don't care whether you're taking a little curly bracket and you're putting it on the end of one line or at the beginning of the next. They don't care. But you know who does care? Experienced engineers. And here's why. It's the pattern thing you were talking about. Like, if it's always the same pattern, then the moment you see something that isn't, your mind twigs on that and goes, okay, what's going on right there, right?
Yeah.
And so, but here's the thing, and why I'm recommending this book, Range. That's super valuable in areas, and this is again one of the passions driving me as a coach to help people. That sort of skill is something that engineers and honestly professionals in almost every endeavor start to develop over time. You've worked with Final Cut Pro, right, for years? Is that what's
Premiere
called?
more recently.
Premiere? Okay.
I moved away from Final Cut when it went from 7 to X.
Okay.
They messed it up.
Did they?
But yeah,
I'm sure that this principle probably applies where you've just done the same thing so many times in so many different projects and types of action that if something is slightly different than an established pattern, without even thinking about it, you clue in on it, don't you?
Yeah. Well, that's the other similarity between programs and film.
Mm-hmm.
Is like, if a program's not running correctly, then you notice it. If it runs really well, you might think every now and then, oh, that was easy.
Right.
But the majority of the time, you expect it to be right.
Yes.
It's the same with film and video editing. If the editing is really, really good and crazy, you go, wow, that was really something. If it's not that kind of like the edit makes this video, but it's just like any Hollywood film, you don't notice the editing unless there's something that isn't right.
Yeah.
Really good editing goes unnoticed because it draws the viewer in.
Oh, that's
to the point where they're immersed.
Yeah.
Same with the program.
Yeah. Spot on. I like that. Well, here's where that whole principle breaks down. And it's something that, like, if you want to look at, like, what are some of the differences between a pretty decent engineer and an elite engineer, which, look, it's all subjective. What does elite mean? It's like, what makes it so someone qualifies to be a senior level engineer in technology? They say they're a senior level engineer. That's really honestly all it is. There's no qualification, there's no license, there's no nothing. You just start marketing yourself as a senior level engineer. It's really quite wild, right? But
yes, you then have to just have the proof of you to back that up before you get called out as a phony.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, because let me tell you, this is another thing I work with people on all the time. Imposter syndrome is very real in the technology industry, but that's a whole other subject, right? But here's the thing, and again, why I recommend this book, Range, right? When you're dealing with a domain, some area of human activity that has a very tightly prescribed set of boundaries, and the types of things inside of it are very well known and well established. I'll use the example of golf because that's what's used in the book Range, right? In the book, towards the beginning, he talks about Tiger Woods, right? And from the beginning of his life, as we all know now because he's a legend, all Tiger did was consume golf. Like from as a toddler, like that's all
he had his first level par round when he was like 3.
Yes, yeah, 4. I think it was 4. It's insane, right? And again, it's a fascinating book. I'm not going to dissect the whole thing, but just high level, one of the really interesting things that the author had seen in his work over like about 25 years is that there are certain domains where the problems of that domain, of that area, are so well known that you can achieve this expert level status in that area. And this whole concept of patterns that you and I were talking about really is a key thing. Like you look at an expert level, athlete, And without even thinking about it, they're processing thousands of individual little data points, and they can predict things really well because of past patterns and experience, because they're dealing in a very well understood, they're working in a very well understood problem domain. And it's totally admirable. And we see this in engineering all the time because there are tools and problems to be solved that are pretty well understood. And you can get very skilled in that tightly prescribed domain. And that's great until you start going outside of the walls, until you start dealing with wicked problems, problems for which there is no path to a solution upon immediate glancing, even by an expert. An expert looks at it and goes, I'm honestly not quite sure even what path to take to get through this. And as we start to develop technology solutions that can encompass the scope of a planet, this happens more and more and more often. And so the normal tools you use that rely on understanding a tightly prescribed knowledge domain and working off of patterns and the very well-known operating bases inside that area, those tools are less and less valuable the more the problem you're attacking involves ambiguity and great degrees of scope and complexity and lots of unknowns. And so when you look at this whole concept, again, it's all arbitrary. Elite level engineer, whatever. I've just seen that there are some engineers who have developed a different set of skills that can embrace that ambiguity and can actually confront something of that magnitude and work to actually corral that, generate ideas on demand, embrace ambiguity, and come out of it with a solution out of left field where people are like, where did that come from? And it's not some gift of genius at all. It's like anything else. There's a framework. There's a technology to attack that kind of thing.
It's funny that you said that, because then in my mind, that directly relates to what we were talking about with mentors. Your mentor embraced the ambiguity of what you were giving him and went outside of his domain of academia.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that you brought that up again, because he's been an advisor to the school now for a decade. He loved what we were doing so much, and not just the idea of a code school, but our approach to it. They relied so heavily on concentrating on the fundamentals before you start giving them all this practical stuff, and the concentration on a live experience and many other aspects, right? He loved that so much. He's been one of our advisors for years. And to come full circle to the beginning of our conversation, part of the reason I do this is because along the way, I've had some mentors that have made tremendous differences in my life. And sometimes it's just this tiny period of time where you work together with somebody and something fundamental changes for you. And I started to recognize this because it happened when I was young. And I think it's a fun story probably to share a little bit. It's back in middle school science class. And I had a teacher. Look, we all have those teachers, right? They just stand out for you decades later. Russell Barhyde. Now, Russell Barhyde did two things I'll never forget. One of them was just funny, and the other one taught me a really important lesson. The funny one is that he was talking to us about hydrogen and how hydrogen is rather explosive, even tiny volumes of it. And so he took a tiny balloon, put a little bit of hydrogen in it, tied it to the end of a very long stick. And then he put a lit match and tied it to the end of another very long stick. And he took both sticks and put them way above his head near the ceiling until the flame hit the balloon, and kablam! Tremendous noise and explosion. And then he hid the sticks behind the counter and just started drawing on the whiteboard like nothing was going on. We were 40 feet from the principal's office. So you hear footsteps and yelling, and the door bursts open, and there's the vice principal what's going on? And Russell's so if you take the tangent of the code, oh, hi, anyway. So I already loved the guy because he was but here's the thing that he did. It's so wild. From this 10 minutes, so many lessons in life. There's this thing called a Van de Graaff generator. And even if you don't know the name, you've probably seen them. It's the kind of thing where you put your hand on it and your hair stands out. It develops great amounts of static electricity, right? Now, he had taught us the theory of if you have a complete circuit for electricity to travel through, it will. But the moment anything breaks that, there'll be a period where there's a tiny little air gap, and the electricity can cross that air gap and produce a little spark. Okay, all right, cool. We're a bunch of nerdy middle schoolers. So he walks the whole group of us over to this big Van de Graaff generator in the corner, has one person put their hand on it, and then we all link hands and we go around to forming a circle, and it ends with another person putting their hand on it. So now this Van de Graaff generator is part of the circle. And then he plugs it in. And now we're all getting a thrill because like we're feeling the static electricity and our hair's standing up all funny. And so far it's just fun. And he says, okay, I want to remind you that if any one of you releases the hand of the person next to you, a spark's going to come off and it's probably going to hurt a little bit. Bye. And he leaves the room. He was a genius, man, because like there's no better way to reinforce this, like at this point, abstract theoretical concept than because someone was about to like, I'm just going to do it. No. And so we had to actually talk and collaborate and figure out how to do it. And we figured it out. We moved our whole circle around super carefully and slowly, collaborating till someone could go over to the corner and wrap their foot around the cord and pull and pull and pull. And the cord comes out and we feel the static electricity die. And finally, someone's like, all right, I'm brave. And we let go. And it's just like, man, thank you. Thank you. Like you found a way to make it. Isn't it?
It sounds like he might have been a little of an evil genius.
Oh, yeah. He was a Vietnam vet, too. So it probably had, like, who knows what else is going on. No, Russell was a fantastic guy. Because you people that make a difference in your life, man. Like, I got a hold of him a few years ago. He was, like, in his 70s, right? It turned out to be, I got a hold of him, like, less than a year before he passed. So I was able to tell him as an adult. Because with that and countless other conversations and advice, the dude changed my life. For the better, right? And so I got to tell him thank you, which was sometimes you don't get to thank your heroes, you know. But again, I don't know if I'll ever make as big a difference as he did in my life for someone else. But I try, you know, and it's what motivates me because again, I wouldn't have achieved any of the things I've actually been able to carve out some success in. No one does it alone. No one does. It's absurd, you know. So I like to help.
Amazing.
Yeah. God, it was funny though. He says, bye, walks out of the room. Wait, where are you going?
So with what you're doing now,
yeah,
what are you doing to market yourself and what have you seen working?
Man, that is a wild question. Like, again, as an engineer, like the whole marketing piece didn't come naturally to me at all. Now, I will say, I'm a pretty social person and I like talking to people, right? And I've done sales also over the years in many ways. So that part of it, but the technology of marketing, right? To answer the question, the things that have been effective are things where I'm just being me. I've tried things where I'm just like putting out value-driven content because some guru said it needs to be that way. But I've found that the things that get the greatest, you know, that resonate most with the people I want to talk to, or where I'm just me. I'm a big old nerd and I'm fascinated by certain subjects that other people aren't fascinated by at all. So whether it's, you know, an article on LinkedIn, this really peek under the hood to what a weirdo Erik is, you know, like I put an article out on LinkedIn about becoming an idea factory, like being able to create ideas on demand, which is, there's a technology for that. It's fascinating. I've used it for decades. And this article though wasn't like, here's the technology of how to produce ideas on demand. No, the article began with me telling a story about me being an idiot in front of my wife. Because I do that. Yeah, I'm this weird dichotomy of like, I can be super brilliant in some cases and then an absolute idiot in other cases. So I don't mind communicating that stuff because it's true, you know?
Authentic.
It is. And I struggled with this for a long time. I just want to be me. And it's something I work with engineers all the time is they don't want to have to put on some weird false sort of picture just to get the job or to convince a recruiter to work with them or put their resume to the top of the pile. How do you maintain that authenticity of who you are? And I figure if I can't, you talk about content or marketing or whatever, like I'm just going to continue to be me. And there'll be people that are like, man, that dude Erik is weird. I want nothing to do with him. Okay. Duly noted. Been dealing with him my whole life. I'm fine with that. Yeah.
That goes back to what you were saying about the fundamentals. Like, no matter whether you're doing video or a post or, I don't know, does anyone use Clubhouse anymore? Audio?
No, although it's funny, like, to bring it full circle, here's Grant's mug. Yesterday, he publicly departed Clubhouse with a rant. Go on to LinkedIn and look up Grant and look at the LinkedIn rant he said about Clubhouse. But anyway, go ahead. I interrupted you.
Amazing. Well, no matter the medium, as long as you have the foundation of being yourself,
yeah,
you're going to win to some extent, which will be the extent of which being yourself allows. Where like all these other people where they're like, my Instagram coach told me I should do some dancing and point at some words. It's like, sure, man. Do you want to do that? Is that you?
Right.
And if it is, conversation over. Cause
Yeah, just, yeah.
I don't want to talk to people like that.
Oh my, I love that example, because here's the thing. We all know, if you study the fundamentals of marketing, that if you, part of what you're looking to do is attract the people that are your tribe, that you love, and repel the people that aren't. If all I want to do is repel, I would dance, because that's all that would happen. Everyone would run fleeing. It's like, I think that person's having a fit.
People that you didn't want to be attracting.
Oh, that's true.
What you were saying there about how you just want to be yourself, that reminded me of both a memory and a post that I did about the memory.
Yeah.
When I was in that 3-year gap before I finished my degree, where I took some time out, I was working in a call center, and I remembered having a fantasy about working in Blue Banana, which is like a shop that does piercings and stuff.
Oh, yeah.
Like Goth and emo stuff.
Yeah.
I was like, imagine being paid to just be myself. And then I did a post about that last year.
Yeah.
Saying like that I'd had this memory, and like now I finally get to be myself, but also on my own terms. So I'm not even an employee of this shop. And like the realization that I'd actually managed to forge that for myself.
You did it.
Like, oh, wow. Done it. Gas. I can just be myself. I can chat to people on podcasts. I can make videos and help other people get to where they want to go in terms of the video content they want to make, without having to sell insurance on the phone, which was a total scam. It was utterly shite. So like,
oh man,
to have that memory and then realization that I'm where I wanted to be, but actually probably better off.
Yeah.
Liberating.
That's fantastic, man.
Lightning.
That's fantastic.
Erik, I'm going to wrap this up. This has been an absolute pleasure. Really fun conversation.
Oh, I feel the same.
Before we leave, can you let people watching and listening at home know where they can find you? And just quickly, to bring things around to what I was saying, this is narrative. I did my introduction. We have the conversation. We wrap things up with an end piece. We need closure. We need to know where we can find you.
Yeah.
For anyone in the tech world who might want your coaching and advice and guidance.
Yeah. You can find me at Your Career Architect in a lot of different platforms. So if you go to yourcareerarchitect.com, there's my site. If you go out to LinkedIn and look up Your Career Architect, you'll find me. Otherwise, if you look up Erik with a K, E-R-I-K, if you look up Erik Gross, you'll find me all over the interwebs, right? But yeah, yourcareerarchitect.com is probably the best place. I am pretty active on LinkedIn. I like it because there's a lot of nerdy professionals out there. But yeah, yourcareerarchitect.com is probably the best place to go.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Like I said, really fun conversation. Absolute pleasure. A lot of the moments of what you were talking about, I was a little lost because I'm not from the tech world, but I think I've managed to follow what you were saying quite well.
I'm glad.
Erik, thank you so much. And for you watching and listening at home, keep being rad.